Well, it's really kind of interesting, Charles, because the strange part about primary elections is those elections, the primary, is going to affect more people personally than even the presidential. When you think about it from the school board, okay, these are going to affect your children. They're going to affect what they're going to learn, when they're going to go to school, the hours they're going to go, the books that they're going to read. So it's really important to them. The county commission races are going to affect their parks and their transportation and their local density for the housing and stuff like that. And yet people don't really truly pay attention to the primaries, and those are the ones that are going to affect them more. You even look at the state races, okay? When you've got the state legislature who's going to be allocating money for the Bright Future Scholarship for your children who are going to go to college and be looking for that kind of money, and yet people ignore these races, and it's really a shame. I have often said, and I mean it, that people are patriotic until they're inconvenienced, okay? And they don't think about what's going to happen on a local basis. They just think they're going to vote for the President of the United States and everything's going to be good tomorrow morning. That's not going to happen. So I think at the primary races, people are really missing the boat when they're not going down here and selecting the proper people who are going to represent them. That school board is going to affect what your kids are going to learn, the books that they're going to read, the hours that they're going to go to school. Are they going to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and have to wait for a bus in the dark? The school board controls those things, and we've got to find some way to make sure that the school board is funded properly to hire better teachers, okay? We've got some great teachers in this county, but we lose great teachers when they can't compete on the salary side, and so we're looking for that. On the county side, when you've got county commissioners who truly don't allocate the budget properly for your neighborhood because you elected the wrong people, because you didn't want to go vote, you didn't want to listen to it, but you wanted to complain, okay? That county commissioner is going to pick out your park for you. They're going to help you with the roads and the transportation in front of your house. It's amazing to me. As I said, people want to vote for the President of the United States, think he's going to save everything. He's not going to save squat. Your local races will cover that. My staff, truly, and I really mean this, they don't need me. They got it down pat. They work like a fine-tuned watch. They're the ones that make it happen. And they start, for example, when we're recruiting poll workers, Laura didn't quit from last year, okay? She's working on it all through the years. Every single day, they're in there trying to find out poll workers for all these locations. The staff is working on precinct locations, and we're having problems with precinct locations, and people don't understand it. We've had several great locations that, to be honest with you, they don't like being inconvenienced. We have some trailer parks, for example, huge trailer parks like Colony Cove, and I'll use their name, Colony Cove. They don't want us back in there anymore, and they've got thousands of people who live there, but it's inconvenient for them, okay? Now, you're talking about being inconvenienced for one day every 2 years, okay? What about all those veterans that live there that were inconvenienced for 4 years and 10 years and 20 years? What about those who are inconvenienced because they have transportation problems and they could vote right there at Colony Cove? We always did it before, but they don't want us back. And you look at River Wilderness, a gated community. They say, well, we don't want people out there. We don't want you driving through a gate in our neighborhood. But they do want our taxpayer money, but they do want to complain about the election, okay? But they really, truly don't want to accommodate us. And so, like I say, everybody's a patriot until they're inconvenienced. And when we find people who don't think about all of the sacrifice that went into giving these people the right to vote, yeah, I get irritated. It's strange to me. I cannot understand it. To me, if they don't want us in there, if they don't want to vote for the county commission, they don't want to vote for the city commission, I think, fine, fix your own roads. Okay? You go fix your own roads if you don't want to elect somebody out here who's going to fight for your neighborhood and fight for your school. I'm sorry, I'm losing more and more sympathy for these people. The word volunteer, when it comes to poll workers, has been around for so long, and it'll be around here for a long time again. But we actually hire these people. We want to make sure that they have, for example, workers' comp insurance and liability insurance. We want to make sure that they're taken care of. But most of our poll workers, the people that we hire, we'll hire 8 or 900 for an election, okay? She will interview over 1,000. We'll hire that 8 or 900. And when those people come aboard, most of those are retired, okay? A lot of our poll workers are aging out. Okay, so we're always looking for new poll workers who want to come in and volunteer. We really, I tell you, one of our favorites is high school kids. You can register to vote in the state of Florida when you're 16. You can't vote until you're 18. But these high school kids, they come in, volunteer, work the polls. Now, you got to listen to this deal because it didn't happen for you and I. We're going to come in, they're going to go through class, so they're going to earn 5 hours of community service. Okay, they got to have that for graduation. Then they get the day off of school, and we're going to pay them a little over $100 to skip school. Now, I got to tell you, I skipped a lot of school when I was a kid. Nobody paid me, So I think it's a great deal, and we're really looking for it. And the clerks at the precincts love it because when their computer breaks down or their technical stuff breaks down, guess who's the first one to jump up and fix it? All these kids are geeks. They know how to fix it, and so it saves a lot of grief. And so we're really looking for these 16, 17-year-old kids, juniors and seniors in high school, who will come down, spend a day working with us on the poll, spend a half a day through training, and get paid for their time off of school. That's not a bad deal. When we started incorporating technology, we used to have 17 full-time employees here. We're down to 13 full-time employees. In the 10 years that I've been here, from the time I got here, we have never increased the budget for this office. And we've been able to do that because we're utilizing technology. And I could not utilize technology without somebody like Scott Farrington. Scott is I call him my number one guy. I agree that the paper says number two, but I'm telling you, his knowledge and technical expertise is just phenomenal. And we would have never done some of these things because I didn't know about them, but Scott did. And so we've really preached that to our people, and all of our people are looking at how can we save money for the office and get the job done at the same time. And so, yeah, I'm quite proud of my staff. I got to tell you, it'll succeed because we have depth in leadership. We've got Scott, we've got Sharon, we've got Laura. I mean, these are a strong team, okay? So that'll always be there. But in addition to that, they care so much. And if you would look at our record, year after year, I think that everybody would say, whether it's here or the Secretary of State's office, Manatee County runs a strong election, very, 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 very few complications from it. In fact, I know it sounds braggadocio, but I don't know of any mistakes we've ever made in an election because we do this so many times, double-checking everything to make sure it happens.
Per Florida statute, one of the sitting county court judges has to be chairperson of the canvassing board, and I campaigned in 2020. I thought the process was extremely interesting, and so I volunteered to do it this year. I've been on the bench about 18 months, and so this was, I think, the first election since, obviously, so here I am. Generally speaking, the public sees judges as serving our community in the courtroom, and we have the pleasure of serving our community in a lot of different ways, including this way, and there is a lot of time spent here, and I'm happy to do it. Generally speaking, the county court judge is the only nonpartisan person on the canvassing board. This year, due to some unforeseen circumstances, that's not the case because we have retired senior judge Bob Farrance on the board. But just like politics don't play a role in the courtroom, it's my job to make sure that they don't play a role here at the canvassing board. Because voting is important, and it's a right that people have here in this great country, and so we want their vote to count, and voting matters to everyone. So that's something we take seriously. Every vote needs to be accounted for, and we make sure that it's going to be a valid vote. So sometimes there's circumstances that make it invalid pursuant to a statute or an administrative rule, and that's our job, to try to figure out the intent of the voter and account for the vote. So there can be some type of quote-unquote issue with different ballots, and all of those issues could be different. I'm not sure if that's answering your question. Sometimes there's a signature issue. Sometimes it could be a person is voting a ballot that is not the party that they're registered to. So these are just all things that are brought to our attention as the board, and we review them one by one, and like I said before, majority vote wins. I think Mr. Bennett runs a tight ship. He's got a great staff here, including Scott Farrington, and I really have a deep respect for what they're doing here to make sure that the election and the process is fair and transparent. Local politics matter, and if you are trying to get something done, like I said, local politics matter, and who you vote for will be how you see change in your community where we all live.
Wow. So you start planning for election day the day after your last election day, usually. Obviously, the last major election that was most people think about was the presidential election in 2020. Since then, we've had redistricting. And redistricting was a challenge. It was a challenge for everybody. As you know, COVID threw some wrenches in a lot of works, but the census was one of them. The census was delayed, which of course delayed all of the data coming out to the state. So the state's redistricting was quite delayed, which then puts us behind the eight ball, because the one thing we cannot delay is the election, right? You can delay everything up to it, but the election day is the election day. So we didn't finish our redistricting until June. And for us, for redistricting, that is incredibly late. We want to be done by January, February at the absolute latest. So between June and today, it was quite a marathon to get everything done, make sure that it was right. It's interesting to look at. I mean, everybody thinks about the county commission districts and the school board districts, and of course the state senate and the state house, and those are all really big districts. But what people frequently forget about are the CDDs, the fire districts, the municipalities. And I don't know if you've ever looked at the municipal boundaries. They're not clean straight lines. So making sure that when you have a street and one side of the street is in the city and the other side of the street is not, and making sure that gets lined up appropriately so that everybody gets the right ballot it was nervous, made me nervous, honestly, because it's not like we get a do-over. So talking about technology and the progression thereof, and we were just talking about redistricting. The first time I went through redistricting was after 2000, after the 2000 census, and we did that with crayons and a really big map. I mean, there was a computer involved, but if you got right down to it, in the end, we bought the largest map we could, and we bought several of them, and you would just go through iterations, and you would take crayons and markers, and you would draw out the way you thought it should be, and then you would translate it into the computer. But in the end, we were going back to that map because there just wasn't this. GIS was a thing, but it wasn't as ingrained as it is today. Today, of course, everything was done on a computer through the GIS system with a lot of county help, and so it is interesting when you look back 20 years of how things were done versus today, and that follows through the entire election process. If you look back 20 years ago when you went to vote, and you walked in and you still showed your ID back then too, but you showed your ID and they had this book in front of you, and you had lines. Were you A through F, or were you G through wherever? And you had to make sure you got in the right line, and they'd look for you, and then they'd start flipping through the book. All right, John Smith, please sign here in the book. And so now it's over the years transitioned to what we call an electronic poll book, which, and back then, we couldn't tell if you were registered somewhere else in the state. We didn't know that. We just knew if you were registered in the county, and now we can we can search the whole state. We can move you in from another county. If you move from Sarasota to Manatee County today, we can move you in and you get your ballot and you go on your way. But even just 15 years ago, we couldn't do that. So it's progressed quite a bit. So the machines, it's kind of interesting because in some ways the technology has advanced greatly. In other ways, it's not that much different. So if you think about a Scantron test that you took back probably when you were in high school or college, they were like 50 years ago. People were still doing the SATs on Scantron tests. In essence, we're doing the same thing. Now, the technology that's used to read the ballots and those ovals is much, much better. It's more accurate and that, but the idea is very, very similar. But as you know, vote by mail has increased almost tenfold since I first started. Well, and actually, when I first started, you had to have an excuse to vote by mail or absentee vote at the time. You had to call. If you called us and said, I want an absentee ballot, you had to tell us why. Were you in the hospital? Were you out of the county? Sorry, you don't qualify. So and since about 2002, any voter can choose just to vote by mail. It's their choice. And so, of course, with that, the progression in 2020, we did about 110,000 vote by mail ballots. And if you take that back to 2000, we were averaging like 8 to 10,000. So now, obviously, it didn't jump from 10,000 to 110,000. It was a progression, so we got to work our way through that progression. But now, in order to process 100,000 ballots inside of the basically 2 to 3 week window we have, we had to advance our technology a little bit. We couldn't just rely on a mass of people looking at these things one at a time. So there's a couple of things that we did. We have scanners now that we feed as soon as we get them in our office. These envelopes with the ballots inside of them go through these scanners, and it reads those ballots so that we instantly know how many ballots we have back from the post office. And then the system also will makes it a lot easier for us to check and verify the signatures. So instead of moving, if you can imagine, instead of moving 100,000 ballots around in a circle and 100 people touching 100,000 pieces of paper, we can do a lot of that digitally, and that makes it work. Without that, it really wouldn't work. The other side of things, we have high-speed scanners, and so they will read about 1,000 ballots a minute. When they're flying, they go about 1,000 ballots a minute. And so again, if you think about running 100,000 ballots through, if you were doing it one at a time by hand, and ask Supervisor Bennett when he got here, that's what we did with the vote by mail ballots, is he would feed them through a scanner one at a time. You just couldn't do that with 100,000. So these high-speed scanners, and you were talking about the accuracy, they have to be tested. They have to be tested at the state level, and actually they're tested federally as well, and they have to be tested to be accurate to over 1 million counts. So what they do is they will run ballots through till it gets to 1 million counts, and it's a deck that they know what it should be, and if it makes any mistakes inside of that, it fails the test. So they're pretty heavily tested. A lot of people, when I talk about vote by mail and they hear 100,000, they're like, oh, you're probably just sampling them, right? You're just looking at a few of them to check the signatures. No, every single ballot is checked. Wow. Every single signature is verified. And if there's a question, any ballot that has a question, no matter what the question is, ultimately it goes to the canvassing board. We say that the staff never rejects a ballot. That's what the canvassing board gets to do. We don't have the power to do that. So if there's any question ever on a ballot, whether it be the signature, whether it be, is it the right ballot for that voter, whatever that question is, if they make check marks instead of fill in the oval, then the canvassing board makes the determination on what that voter's intent was. And so it's really important to have a good canvassing board, and I think we do have a really good canvassing board that is engaged and interested and is actually looking at every ballot. And so that's important, because if they're not interested and they're just putting it by, then you don't get the accuracy that you really need. So in the primary election today, we're up to about a 30% turnout, which is pretty good for a primary, but in reality, if you think about it, 30% of the voters is really low. We would love to have 50%, 70%. In a general election, we usually get close to 70%. And so that's great. But what people don't understand, it's the primary a lot of times that picks their county commissioner. In this election, there's going to be 2 state senators that are chosen in the primary. There's going to be a school board member that is chosen in the primary. And quite likely, there's going to be 3 county commissioners that are chosen in the primary. So a lot of times people think about the big races, the governor and the president, but in reality, it's your county commission, it's your school board that affects you the quickest and the closest, and you're going to feel those effects a lot quicker than you will who your president. And I'm not saying the president isn't important, because of course they are, but it's your county commissioners that are going to make sure you have good roads, and it's your school board to make sure you have good schools. And those are the things that people kind of don't think about that I wish they would.
When I first came to town and started practicing law, the Supervisor of Elections office was in a closet in the old courthouse, the old Manatee County Courthouse, and it was just before Bob Sweat, but he also was there too, and it was pretty comical, because if you got involved with politics, you'd go on the courthouse steps and everybody would be packed up, and then there'd be in this little tiny closet, there'd be people counting ballots by hand, and it was really interesting. I've watched, again, the optic scanning is a big deal. Whatever these machines are called that they have now, where you put 100 of them in and they come out accurately, because we've tested them within seconds, is amazing to me. So it makes a big difference. And whereas on maybe an election night back in the 90s, early 2000s, you would plan on being here at the canvassing board, the Supervisor of Elections office, till past midnight. No question about it. I mean, no question about it. Frankly, I got thrown into it about 21 years ago. I didn't even know what a canvassing board was. That, of course, turned out to be the Bush v. Gore campaign. So I ended up in what was the old Supervisor of Elections building for about 2 months thereafter. It's been extremely important since then. It's basically a life's civics lesson. And you realize how much work goes into not just counting ballots, but ensuring the quality and the security of the system. And it's incredible here. The staff has been wonderful, and many of these people are the same people that I remember from 20 plus years ago are still here, so they're very loyal also. But we have a very, very well-run, well-organized Supervisor of Elections office here in Manatee County. Good people. We do before we ever get to this point, before we get to this 11th hour stuff, we've already been through logics and accuracy tests with every one of them, well, with a percentage of the machines randomly taken, and we go through and we ensure that mail-in ballots are appropriate and proper, that they've been properly signed, properly complied with the law with regard to dating, signing, mailed from the precinct, or that they were registered to. So it's an amazing process, frankly, and it never ceases to amaze me. Seriously, every year there's more to it. There's more I learn. I've watched the development of the laws over the years. When I first started, we had no regulations with regard to postmarks and how to handle if you don't have a postmark. That's been resolved. There's been regulations with regard to accepting overseas ballots after the fact, that we now don't have to do a discretionary matter. So most of this is pretty much just a policy. I can tell you, I've been here long enough that there have been elections that have been decided on very few votes. And I know of elections where later on somebody said, you know, I just assumed such and such was going to happen, so I didn't vote, but I wish I had, and that's number one. So you have a right to vote, and you should do it. You should take advantage of it. It's very important locally. These decisions are made on a regular basis, on a daily basis, and school boards have an effect, especially if you have minor children. Well, when I started, again, in early 2000, Bob Sweat had already gone ahead and adopted the optic scanning system, whereas on the East Coast, that whole Bush v. Gore election was Chad's. So we were ahead of our time anyway. Bob Sweat was president of the Supervisor of Elections for the state of Florida. He was very experienced. Mike came in, and at the same time Bob Sweat retired, his chief assistant also retired. Mike came in and with his assistant, who is, a wealth of knowledge, and so we've been very fortunate. I go to statewide judges conferences because it's the county judges that are on the canvassing board, and you can talk with other counties and see that they may be in a little more disarray than we are, but we've been very, very, very fortunate in Manatee County. It is always, and this is true for all 67 counties in the state of Florida, there's only 3 people on the canvassing board, so it doesn't matter if you're in Baker or Lafayette or Levy, which are very small counties, or Miami-Dade, Broward, Palm Beach, they're large counties. It's always three members. The county judge appointed to handle the canvassing board is the chairperson of the canvassing board for that particular election. The supervisor of elections would always be on the canvassing board unless he or she is up for election and couldn't be involved. And then the county commission, it starts with the chairman of the county commission, chairperson of the county commission. And if they are up for election, then it would have to be somebody else unless they decide to recuse themselves and step down for whatever reason. And normally what happens is if your chairperson steps down, then another person on the county commission that's not running for election would step forward and take the position. We'd have a person on from the county commission. That hasn't happened in this particular instance. The 4 individuals on the county commission that are not up for election, any one of them could have been in my spot. I represent them. I represent the county commission because I had to come in because they apparently have endorsed additional candidates in this particular race, and that would recuse them. Well, before we have to review, there's a wonderful staff. Well, first there's a machine that may say there's something a little awry with the ballot, and the staff will also check that out. I do think that some of the bigger counties probably have staff make decisions. In our case, we're a medium-sized county. We're probably able to review any questionable ballot. We can look at signatures. We have signatures on file. We can look to see if there was for example, we get 2 ballots in from what would appear to be a husband-wife, same last name, same address, and whereas the husband may have signed on the wife's ballot and vice versa. And those are types of things that are just legitimate excuses or just mistakes that they've made. We're not about to say, well, they signed the wrong ballot and they're going to go out. So yes, the bottom line is you always attempt to compute each and every ballot, but you're always looking at the intent of the voter. So you're looking at what is the intent, and you just sometimes have to be a little careful when it comes to when they start putting X's through different names instead of actually voting the bubble or the circle, whatever. And so those are all things we look at. We have to do it all the time, and we go through each and every one. Fortunately, we're able to do that over a period of time, so we're not doing that all tonight. We've been doing that over the past several weeks for mail-in ballots that may be not unsigned. Oh, and the nice thing, the real advantage of nowadays is that when I started, at that time, if, for example, somebody signed incorrectly or their signature didn't match, and it could be for whatever reason, it could be they had a medical issue in the interim since their signature, there's nothing you could do about it other than to reject it, and then tell them after the election, and then they could correct it hopefully by the next election. And hopefully it would be in the primary, not the general. Now what we can do is we get them in, it doesn't match, there seems to be an issue, there's a problem, we send it back and tell them what the issue is. They can then they can send us an affidavit, which we give them, sworn to, just saying, yes, that is my current signature, yes, accept that ballot.